Hello, everybody. Going to be doing a wiki dive today into Blue Note recordings. It's the first of my 2 episodes of diving through Wikipedia and seeing where it takes me. Start with Blue Note. It's a good place to start since I love jazz. And so the article for the day, Blue Note Records. Let's see what it says. Blue Note Records is an American jazz record label now owned by Universal Music Group and operated under Capitol Music Group, established in 1939 by the German Jewish immigrants Alfred Lion and Max Margulis. It derived its name from the blue notes of jazz and blues. Originally dedicated to recording traditional jazz and small group swing, the label began to switch its attention to modern jazz around 1947. From there, Blue Note grew out to become one of the most prolific, influential, respected jazz labels of the mid-20th century. Noted for its role in facilitating the development of hard bop, post bop, avant-garde jazz, and its iconic modernist art tradition. Blue Note has principally been associated with hard bop style of jazz, mixing bebop with other forms of music, including soul, blues, rhythm and blues, and gospel, but also recorded essential albums in the avant-garde and free styles of jazz. Horace Silver, Jimmy Smith, Freddie Hubbard, Lee Morgan, Art Blakey, Grant Green, Hank Mobley, Wayne Shorter, Bobby Hutcherson, and Jackie McLean were among the label's leading artists. During its heyday in the 1950s and 60s, the photography and graphic art of Reed Miles created a series of iconic album covers, often incorporating session photos by Francis Wolff, which added to Blue Note's artistic reputation. Sounds pretty cool. I think this person died today or recently. I'm going to check out who Hank Mobley was. Mobley died at 86. Henry Mobley was an American tenor jazz saxophonist and composer. Mobley was described by Leonard Feather as a middleweight champion of the tenor saxophone, a metaphor used to describe his tone that was neither as aggressive as John Coltrane nor as mellow as just Lester Young, in its style that was laid back and subtle and melodic, especially in contrast with players such as Coltrane and Sonny Rollins. The critic Stasia Profa claimed him as one of the most underrated musicians of the bop era. Mobley's compositions include Double Exposure, Soul Station, and Dig Dis. Mobley was born in Eastman, Georgia, but raised in Elizabeth, New Jersey, near Newark. He described himself as coming from a musical family and spoke of his uncle playing in a jazz band. As a child, Mobley played piano. When he was 16, an illness kept him in the house for several months. In response, his grandmother bought him a saxophone to help occupy his time. He tried to enter a music school in Newark, but wasn't accepted since he wasn't a resident. So he taught himself theory and harmony from books that his grandmother bought for him, by also teaching himself to play the tenor saxophone. When was this? I think 30, so 16, that's 46. Okay. At 19, he started to play with local bands, and months later worked for the first time with such musicians as Dizzy Gillespie, Mac Roach. Roach introduced Mobley to the New York jazz scene in 1951, and over the next 2 years, the latter began composing and recording tunes of his own. He played with multiple R&B bands during this period and played for 2 weeks in 1953 with Duke Ellington Orchestra when saxophonist Jimmy Hamilton was recovering from dental work. When Charlie Parker heard Mobley playing, he advised the musician to take more influence from blues music. In 1953, he was hired by Mac Roach and to play an album released Mac Roach's Quartet featuring Hank Mobley. He later appeared on 2 Roach sessions recorded in 1957 and 1958 for MRC Records. Shortly after working with Roach, he began working regularly with another drummer and bandleader, Art Blakey. He and Blakey took part in one of the earliest hard bop sessions alongside pianist Horace Silver, bassist Doug Watkins, and trumpeter Kenny Dorham. The results of these sessions were released as Horace Silver and the Jazz Messengers. At this point, the band was a collective, sometimes appearing and recording under the names of either Silver or Blakey. Mobley was also in the Jazz Messengers for the recording of the live album at the Cafe Bohemia, and he appeared on the Columbia Records studio album, The Jazz Messengers. Mobley used Jazz Messengers rhythm section as his backing band for the 1955 Blue Note debut, Hank Mobley Quartet. When the Jazz Messengers split up in 1956, Mobley continued working with Silver for a short time, appearing on Silver's Blue, 6 Pieces of Silver, and Stylings of Silver. Well, album cover. Nice. Summer's Blue, 1956. Rejoining, Mobley worked with brief periods with Blakey for a few years to join the drummers band, which it's called Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, and was no longer a collective. The spring and summer of 1959. He also hired Blakey to play on 2 of his Blue Note solo albums in 1960. Go back to Blue Note. Kind of interested in these guys. Let's look at Alfred Lion. Alfred Lion, or Lowe, was a German-born American record executive who co-founded the jazz record label Blue Note in 1939. Lion retired in 1967, having sold the company after producing recordings by leading musicians throughout the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Lion was born in Schönberg, later a borough of Berlin, in 1908. His fascination with jazz began at age 16 when he saw a concert by Sam Wooding's orchestra. He was an American jazz pianist, arranger, and bandleader living and performing in Europe. In 1926, Lion immigrated to the United States, but while working on the New York docks, he was attacked by an anti-immigrant worker. He returned to Germany to convalesce. From 1933, Lion lived in South America, working for German import-export companies, returning to New York in 1938. His presence from Spirituals to Swing concert at Carnegie Hall inspired him to start a record company. His concerts were presented by John Hammond in Carnegie Hall 38 and 39. Concerts included Count Basie, Benny Goodman, Big Joe Turner, Pete Johnson. In partnership with a communist writer, Mac Margolis, okay, that sounds interesting, who supplied the startup capital, Communists supplied the startup capital. Lion founded Blue Note in 1939 in the label's first record session on January 6th. Lion recorded 2 musicians who had impressed him earlier in the concert, the boogie-woogie pianist Albert Ammons and Meade Lux Lewis. Wow. The company's first tape recorded the same year was Sidney Bechet's recording of Summertime. It's notable for being issued on a 12-inch 70 RPM record instead of a 10-inch owing to its length. Clarinetist. By the time Lion was drafted in the Army, his Berlin childhood friend, Francis Wolff, had joined him and under the wing of Milt Gabler in his Commodore music store. Wolff sustained the business in Lion's absence. Margolis had by now permanently dropped out of any involvement with Blue Note. At the presiding of Ike Quebec, who was a Blue Note recording artist and talent scout, in the 40s, Lion began to explore more modern developments in jazz, and Quebec introduced Lion to Thelonious Monk. The first modern jazz musician Blue Note was to record. Blue Note's involvement with modern jazz was not total for several years, and Lion continued his label's association with Bechet and clarinetist George Lewis into the 50s. Wolff would supervise a few sessions himself until Lion's retirement concentrated on the company's business affairs. It became known as hard bop, predominate in Blue Note's output during the 50s and 60s. Musicians such as Art Blakey and Horace Silver, among others, epitomized the style, and in the mid-50s, however, Blue Note was a struggling label hit by the record industry's changeover to the 12-inch LP format, but the popularity of the Oregon soul jazz craze, driven by the innovative work of Jimmy Smith, ensured the label survived. Ike Quebec, who was for much of the 50s worked outside of jazz and battling a heroin addiction, returned to Blue Note in 1959 as both a recording artist and an employee, working in A&R to help the label identify new talent and shape in the content of the LP releases. 3 significant elements that make Blue Note releases stand out: the work of recording engineer Rudy Van Gelder, the photographs of Francis Wolff, and the cover design principally by Reed Miles. Lion and Wolff were also respected musicians for their straight dealing for hanging out on the jazz scene. Blue Note also recorded avant-garde musicians like Andrew Hill and Cecil Taylor. Indeed, it was Lion's discovery of Hill, which he would later cite, along with his earlier involvement with Thelonious Monk and their fellow pianist Herbie Nichols, having given him a particular pleasure during his career. Duke Pearson, who Lion hired to do the A&R work after Quebec's death in 1963, helped ensure the label's roster remained as fresh as a whole. And the popularity of that Horace Silver Song for My Father Lee Morgan's A Sidewinder. Know that one. That's a good one. Enjoyed resulted in Lion being pressured by his distributors and producing more hits. Having suffered from heart problems for years, Lion retired in 1967, having sold Blue Note and label catalog to Liberty Records in 1965. Wolf stayed with the label until his death in 1971. Liberty Records, in turn, was acquired by United Artists, and the Blue Note imprint went dormant until it was revived by record executive Bruce Lundvall under the ownership of EMI. I wonder when that was. It doesn't say. Then let's look him up. As an American recording company executive, best known for his period as the president and CEO of Blue Note labels, reporting directly to Eric Dickley, the chief of EMI. A career spanning half a century, Bruce Lundvall signed a wide range of artists, including Willie Nelson, Herbie Hancock, Dexter Gordon, Willie Shaw, Willie Nelson, Natalie Cole, Cassandra Wilson, Anita Baker, Nora Jones. He had the following labels: Blue Note Jazz, Angel Records for classical, and Manhattan Records for adult pop. Lundvall began his music career at marketing at Columbia. Who we're talking about here? Columbia remained for 21 years, becoming the president of domestic divisions of CBS Records in 1976. In 1974, he gave up the green light to Bruce Springsteen's breakthrough album, Born to Run, after hearing the song of the same name. In 1979, Bruce Lundvall organized and sponsored in Havana, Cuba, the Havana Jam that took place from the 2nd to 4th of March with Chris Christopherson, Rita Coolidge, Stephen Stills, the Trio of Doom, Fania All-Stars, Billy Swan, Bonnie Bramlett, Mike Finnegan, Weather Report, Billy Joel, plus an array of Cuban artists such as Ira Kiri. It's a band by Chucho, Pancho Alonso, Tata Guinness, and Orquesta Aragon. The performances are captured on Ernesto Juan Castellanos' documentary Havana Jam 79 on the 2 Columbia albums. I wonder how that pulled that off. I'm going to look that up. The Havana Jam was a 3-day music festival that took place at the Karl Marx Theater in Havana, Cuba from March 2nd to March 4th, 1979. The event was sponsored by Bruce Lundvall, the president of Columbia Records, Jerry Masucci, the president of Fania Records, and the Cuban Ministry of Culture. The festival also included American acts. Okay, we got that. Some more people like Tony Williams, Jaco Pastorius. In 1977, President Jimmy Carter and Cuban President Fidel Castro started to loosen the political tensions between the two countries and open intersections both in Havana and Washington, D.C. It was the first time in almost 2 decades after Castro's rise to power, there was real interest in establishing a normalization of diplomatic relations and lifting the embargo against Cuba. In 1978, CBS director Lundvall, together with a group of company's music enthusiasts, made a 4-day trip to Havana where they took great interest in Cuban music, especially Afro-Cuban jazz band Icare. After months of discussion, Lundvall assigned Icare, and in July, the group traveled to New York to perform an unannounced guest set at the famed Newport Jazz Festival. Rave reviews led to an invitation from the prestigious Montreux Jazz Festival in Switzerland. Wow, that's pretty interesting. That band got out of Cuba. I haven't heard of them. I should listen to that maybe later. After a few months, Icare won their first Grammy with the album Icare and recorded at the Montreux Jazz Festival in Newport. Then in the fall of 1978, he joined forces with Fania Records and convinced the Cuban cultural authorities to organize a 3-day festival in Havana. The event, spontaneously entitled Havana Jam, was set for March 2nd. By early February, the Lundvall team had organized a roster. Representing the U.S. would be Billy Joel, Stephen Stills, Weather Report, Chris Christopherson, and Rita Coolidge, and the Fania All-Stars, and the CBS Jazz All-Stars, a group conceptualized by Lundvall, which was scheduled to feature more than 20 top jazz artists. The event came closer. CBS Records personnel began working to organize it. Rehearsals were scheduled for the CBS Jazz All-Stars. Equipment was rented. A wide cross-section of media was invited. Both recording and video taping plans were confirmed. Record producers Bert DeCoteau and Mike Bernicker flew down with the crew to support the team for a mobile 24-track from the record plant.